Welcome back to another Construct video. I've recently just been playing Halo Infinite. I thought it would be really cool to try and program some of the abilities from that game, starting with the threat sensor. So what I want to do is make it so all enemies that cannot be seen by our player are hidden, and then if we press a button such as spacebar, we get a flash of the enemies on the screen, and then after a while they disappear. So having these different abilities that we can use inside our different games, whether it be a top-down or a platform game. So to get started, what we first need to do is actually make these enemies disappear. So when we're playing the game, if we can't see them, they disappear. So we need to do this in two steps. The first step is we need to add a behavior to our player, and we want to have the line of sight behavior to check if the player can see our different enemies. Now by default, this is set to 10,000 and it's got obstacles set to solid. So make sure all your walls have the solid behavior, if not this won't work. And they can only set to 360, so it doesn't matter which way we're facing. For the enemies, we're actually going to add a behavior called tween. We don't need this behavior, but it'll give us a much nicer effect, so it's worth adding. We can jump into our code. So what we're going to do is check if our player has line of sight between our object, being the enemy. Then what we can do is take our enemy. I want this object called tween one property. Now what tween does is it animates between two states. So we want to tween between the opacity. We want the end value to be 100 because we're seeing the enemy, and 0.5 I feel is a really good amount for this. Take all this code, copy and paste it. We're going to invert, so we're seeing what happens if we do not have line of sight over our enemy. And then if that's the case, what we can do is we can put the opacity back to 0. So let's make a start. Let's see how it looks. And you'll see that all our enemies start and they disappear. And as we go around the level, you'll see the ones that we can see come up and the ones that disappear start fading away into our level. Now you notice at the start of the level, all the enemies could be visible. So an easy fix for this is just say start of layouts. At the start of layout, we're just going to make everything invisible. So it's a really good just sort of start thing. And if they've got line of sight, they become visible again straight away using our other action that we've put in. So set that to 0. So now if we run this once more, everything starts with 0 opacity. And then as we see enemies, they start popping in onto our screen using our line of sight function. So now that's set up, now we can actually create our threat sensor to be able to see through those walls. So we want to be able to check when a button's pressed, so we need to click on our objects, add a new object, and add the keyboard. This means we can use the spacebar. So I'm going to add a new event. I'm going to say keyboard, on key pressed, space. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start two different timers. So we need to add a timer to our player. First one is going to check for the ability runtime, and the second one's going to be a cooldown. So this is not too overpowered. It's got a use to be used. So timer, and then we're going to add action, player, and we're going to start two timers. So first one, we're going to make it last for 3 seconds, and it's going to be the ability itself. So we can call this walls, and then we can copy and paste this, and we can change this one to say 10 seconds. This is going to be a lot longer, and this is going to be our cooldown. Make sure you spell these exactly the same because we're going to use these later on. So if you've used capital for both of these, make sure you use a capital for both, just so you don't get any mistakes later on. So we also want to make sure that we can't just keep pressing space every single time, because that will just keep these counters going back to where they were. So we're just going to add a new condition, player, and we're going to say is time running, and then the tags, and again just make sure we spell this correctly. So I know I've got a capital and then a lowercase d for cooldown. So we're going to say is cooldown running. We're just going to invert this. So now if we press space and the cooldown counter is not running, we'll start both these timers fresh again. Now all we have to do is we need to do something when these two timers are running. So add a new event, player, is timer running, and we want this one to be wolves. And then next we need to check if we have not got line of sight. So we're going to add a new condition. Player has got line of sight between objects, and then we'll invert this in just a second. And invert. So what we're doing at the moment is we're checking, is his ability running, and can we not see enemies? If that's the case, we want these enemies to light up now. So to do this, all we do is we do enemy, and first thing we need to do is set the opacity to 100. And the second thing we're going to do as well, just for a bit of effect, is actually set the color, and we're going to do 255 in the red. This will make it glow bright reds, like you sort of see of a lot of these games. What we also need to do is, we don't want all the enemies to be red, and sometimes we get that glitch. Just to fix that, we're just going to right click, add an else statement. So if they're not glowing red, we just want to take our enemy, set color, and this will also allow them to change back from red. And if you ever want to set the color back to its default, it's just 100 in all three sections. So 100, 100, 100. And this means that when they're not red, they'll go back to going green. So let's run all this code now and see what it does. So as before, we can move around and we can see all the different enemies. As soon as we hit space, they all light up for 3 seconds. They go back to green and they disappear unless they're in our range. So let's make sure we've got a couple in our range this time. So we've got 3 that can be seen. You can see that one in the top left corner is quite far away. So that's what would happen if you'd edit the range, he would not be able to see. And then those stay green, the rest come up red. A couple of seconds pass. I can hit space, nothing's going to happen because it's on cooldown. And then as soon as the cooldown ends in 10 seconds, flash up red again. Final thing I'm going to show you is just how we can add a sort of counter on how long our cooldown's left. So to do this, all we're going to do is go back to our layout, insert a new object, and we're going to get a text box, and we'll call this cooldown. I'm going to put it up into the top corner like so. I'm going to change the text to white so we can see it. So that's it. The starting text is going to be cooldown 0. And then all we're going to do is go to our event sheets. We're going to say system, every tick, cooldown, set text. And this one's going to be a little bit confusing to do, but what we're going to do is we're going to do round, so we get a round number, so we're not getting any decimals. And then we're going to do player, because the timer is linked to the player. Then timer, because it's linked to the timer function. And then current time, and then in brackets, we then need to put our tag, which is cooldown. Again, make sure it's spelled correctly, so I'm using a lowercase d. And then that should be it. And then final thing we need to do is round off that last bracket, so everything comes colorized, and then we can test it once more. She starts at 0, and then it counts up 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 10. Can't do anything. Then once it gets to 10, it will come off cooldown, and we can start using it again. Hope you enjoyed this video. I plan to do a couple more based off some of the abilities from different games, especially exploring some of the others in Halo, such as the grapple hook and the thruster pack. If you enjoy that sort of stuff, or you enjoy making games construct free, please subscribe. I do lots of these videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.